the Mafia's secret son too. The sound of crashing waves filled the air as Dom stood on the balcony of his villa, staring out into the endless horizon. The revelation of Luca's existence had shaken him to his core, but now came the hardest part, deciding what to do next. The Mafia life had dictated every decision he had made since birth, but for the first time, he had something more precious than power or money. He had a son. Inside, Sophia sat stiffly on the couch, her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of tea. Dom lingered in the doorway, his sharp eyes studying her. He noticed the way she bit her lip, a habit he remembered from years ago when she was nervous or deep in thought. It sent a flicker of something unwanted through him, an ache for what once was, for what he had lost. She avoided his gaze, but he could see it, the war behind her eyes. The past wasn't so easily buried, and neither was whatever still lingered between them. Her fingers trembled slightly, not just from exhaustion, but from the storm of emotions swirling inside her. Fear, because she knew what Dom was capable of. Regret, because no matter how much she tried to convince herself that leaving was the right decision, she still felt the weight of what she had taken from Luca. And something else, something dangerous. An ache she had tried to bury, a pull toward the man she had once loved. But could she trust him? Could she even trust herself around him? Dom watched her from the doorway, noting the exhaustion etched into her face. It was clear she hadn't been sleeping well, and he couldn't blame her. His world was dangerous. She had every right to be afraid. "I still don't know why you think I should trust you," Sophia said, her voice breaking the silence. She set the tea down, meeting his gaze with wary defiance. "Nothing about this changes what you are." Dom inhaled deeply, leaning against the doorway now. "I don't expect you to trust me overnight," he admitted, "but I'm not the same man I was when you left." Sophia scoffed, shaking her head. "You say that, but your life hasn't changed, has it? You still answer to your mother. You still play the same deadly game." His jaw clenched at the mention of his mother. "Not for much longer." Sophia frowned. "What does that mean?" Dom hesitated, the words forming on his lips but never spoken. He wasn't sure what he would have said. Maybe a promise. Maybe something he wasn't ready to admit to himself. That he would change. That he would leave the life behind for Luca? For her? The unspoken weight hung between them, thick and suffocating. Before he could answer, his phone buzzed on the table, shattering the moment. He strode over and picked it up, recognizing the number immediately. His second-in-command, Marco. Dom answered. "What is it?" "We have a problem, boss." Marco's voice was sharp. "Word got out about the kid." Dom's grip on the phone tightened, his knuckles whitening around the device. A surge of adrenaline shot through his veins, his breath slowing as a familiar rage coiled inside him. Memories of past betrayals flashed through his mind. The moment he realized Sophia was gone, the emptiness that had consumed him in her absence. He had told himself he had buried those feelings, yet here they were, clawing their way to the surface. Now someone was threatening to take the one thing he never knew he had, the one thing he would die to protect. His pulse thundered in his ears as he forced his voice into a deadly calm. "What did you just say?" A sharp pulse of adrenaline shot through his veins, his heartbeat hammering in his ears. His mind reeled, flashing back to all the years he had spent thinking he had nothing left, that he had lost everything, and now to know that his son, his flesh and blood, was in the crosshairs of his enemies. His stomach twisted with a mix of fury and dread. "It's all over the underground. Someone tipped off the Romano family that you've got an heir." Dom's blood ran cold. The Romano family had been his father's rivals for decades, a feud drenched in betrayal and blood. He remembered being a boy, watching his father return from a meeting with Matteo Romano, his knuckles bruised, his face set like stone. "Never trust a Romano, son," his father had warned. "They smile while they sharpen the knife for your back." Dom had learned that lesson firsthand when a supposed truce turned into an ambush, one that cost him men and nearly his own life. And now, knowing that they had Luca in their sights. The rage in his chest burned hotter than ever. If they knew about Luca, it meant one thing: they would try to use him as leverage. Sophia's expression shifted at his darkening face. "What's wrong?" Dom ended the call, his jaw set in stone. "We're not safe here." Sophia's eyes widened. "What do you mean we're not safe? What's going on, Dom?" He exhaled sharply. "The Romano family knows about Luca. If they know, others will soon. They'll see him as a weakness, as leverage against me." Sophia's face drained of color. "Leverage?" "They could try to take him," Dom admitted, his voice thick with restrained rage. "To control me, to force my hand." Sophia shot to her feet, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Her hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the couch, trying to steady herself. "We have to leave," she exclaimed, her voice unsteady. "We need to take Luca and go somewhere far away." Her heart pounded against her ribs and her eyes darted around the room as if expecting danger to crash through the doors at any moment. The mere thought of Luca being used as a pawn in this deadly game sent a shiver of terror down her spine, making her stomach churn. Dom grabbed her wrist gently but firmly. "Running isn't going to fix this." For a moment, Sophia froze. His touch was firm, yet familiar, sending an unwelcome shiver down her spine. Memories of the past crashed into her, times when his grip had been one of comfort, of passion, not desperation. Her pulse quickened, and she hated that even now, with everything between them broken, her body still reacted to him. She yanked her hand away, her voice sharper than she intended. "And what does that mean? More bloodshed, more violence? I don't want Luca anywhere near this." "I don't either," Dom snapped, "which is why I need to make sure they understand. Luca is off limits." "And how do you plan to do that?" she asked, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. Dom's eyes darkened. "By sending a message." That night, Dom left Sophia and Luca under heavy protection and met Marco at one of their private locations. The warehouse was dimly lit, filled with crates of weapons and stacks of money, but none of that mattered to Dom now. "What's the situation?" Dom asked as Marco handed him a file. "The Romano family sent a couple of their men to snoop around the villa earlier," Marco said. "They didn't get close, but they're watching, waiting." Dom flipped open the file, scanning the photos of the men who had been lurking nearby. He felt his rage boil to the surface. "Did you catch them?" Marco smirked. "We took care of one." The other ran back to report, "Just as we planned." Dom nodded. "Good, then it's time to make them understand." The drive to the restaurant felt like an eternity. Dom sat in the back of the car, his fingers drumming restlessly against his thigh. His mind was a battlefield of strategies and emotions, each one colliding into the next. He had spent years ensuring that no one could use his emotions against him, building a reputation as a man with no vulnerabilities. But now, with his son's life on the line, every strategy, every precaution, felt like it might not be enough. For the first time, he wondered, was it possible to be both a father and a mafia boss? Could he balance the two without destroying everything he touched? Every calculated move in his mind circled back to the one undeniable fact: Luca was now a target. He had spent years ensuring that no one could use his emotions against him, but now, with his son's life on the line, every strategy, every precaution, felt like it might not be enough. Guilt gnawed at him. Had he underestimated the danger? Had his choices put Sophia and Luca in this situation? He exhaled sharply, his jaw tightening as the car pulled up in front of the restaurant. This meeting wasn't just about sending a message. It was about proving to himself that he could still protect the people who mattered most. He walked into an upscale Italian restaurant owned by the Romanos, his presence commanding the attention of everyone inside. His dark suit, crisp and unruffled, masked the storm brewing within him. He knew this confrontation wasn't just about sending a message, it was about control. And Dom Russo never let control slip through his fingers. The Romano underboss, Salvatore Romano, sat at the back, flanked by two guards. He looked up with a smirk as Dom approached. "Russo, Salvatore greeted, swirling his wine. What a surprise. Dom sat across from him, his expression unreadable. We need to talk. Salvatore chuckled. I heard you have a kid, congratulations. Dom's fist clenched under the table. Luca is off limits. Salvatore leaned forward, amusement fading. And if he isn't? Dom leaned in as well, his voice low and deadly. Then I will burn your entire bloodline to the ground. Salvatore's smirk faltered for just a second, his gaze flicking toward Sophia's name, as though he finally understood the depth of Dom's fury. The realization settled over him like a slow, creeping smirk. Interesting, he mused, swirling his wine lazily. Seems like there's more at stake here than just business, Russo. How far would you really go for her? His words were laced with curiosity, but Dom saw the deeper meaning. The Romanos weren't just testing his strength, they were probing his weaknesses. And the moment they saw Sophia and Luca as leverage, this war would escalate beyond bloodshed into something personal. For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick with tension. Then Salvatore grinned, leaning back. I always did like your fire, Russo. Dom stood, adjusting his suit. Stay away from my family. As he walked out, he knew this was just the beginning. War was coming, and with it, a reckoning that would test him in ways he had never imagined. The weight of fatherhood clashed against the instincts bred into him since birth. He had built his empire on fear and dominance, but Luca had changed the stakes. Violence had always been the answer, but now, for the first time, he wondered if it was also the problem. Could he truly protect his son without becoming the monster he had sworn he wouldn't be? The war ahead wasn't just against the Romanos. It was against himself. But he would do whatever it took to keep Luca and Sophia safe, even if it meant destroying everyone in his path. Sophia and Luca in danger. While Dom was handling the Romanos, trouble was already brewing back at the villa. A shadowy figure lurked in the trees, watching the security detail closely. Inside, Sophia was reading to Luca, trying to keep herself distracted, but a sudden sound, like the snap of a branch, made her freeze. Her instincts screamed danger. A few moments later, the power flickered and the house plunged into darkness. Luca clung to her. Mama, what's happening? Sophia's pulse pounded as she tried to steady her voice. Stay close to me, sweetheart. We need to be very quiet. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Someone was inside. She reached instinctively for the small knife she had hidden in a drawer, gripping it tightly. Her mind raced. Escape wasn't an option, not with Luca. She had sworn to keep him safe, and now that promise was being tested. The door creaked open just as a gunshot rang out from outside. A scream followed. Then, silence. One of Dom's guards burst in, his face tight with urgency. Miss Sophia, we need to move. Now. Sophia's breath hitched. She looked at Luca, who clung to her with wide, frightened eyes. Should she grab anything? A bag? A weapon? No. There was no time. Luca's small hands gripped her sleeve. Mama, what's happening? He whispered, his voice shaking. Sophia crouched down, forcing a calm she didn't feel. We're going on a little adventure, sweetheart, but you have to be very brave and quiet for me, okay? Luca nodded, though his lip quivered. She scooped him into her arms, her heart hammering in her chest as she turned back to the guard. As she held Luca close, her mind betrayed her with a thought she didn't want to acknowledge. Dom should have been here. Despite everything, despite the anger and the years apart, a part of her ached for him to be the one protecting them, to be the one making sure they were safe. But he wasn't. And she had to do this alone. Resentment curled in her chest, mixing with something she refused to name. Something dangerously close to longing. Where do we go? She demanded, her voice steadier than she expected. Dom's confrontation with his mother. After leaving the Romanos, Dom didn't head straight to the villa. He had one more stop to make. The Russo estate loomed ahead, its cold, towering presence as unyielding as the woman who ruled it. Evelina Russo sat in her lavish study sipping a glass of wine when Dom stormed in. She barely looked up. "So it's true," she mused. "You have a son?" Dom's fists clenched. "You knew, didn't you? That's why you made sure Sophia left." Evelina exhaled, setting her glass down. "Of course I knew. And I did what was necessary." Rage burned through Dom, but he forced himself to stay calm. "If anything happens to Luca because of your manipulations, I will destroy everything you've built." Evelina smirked. "Darling, I didn't raise you to make idle threats." He took a step closer, his voice dark and steady. "And I didn't come here to make one. This is a warning. Stay out of my family's business, or I'll make sure you regret it." For the first time, a flicker of something unreadable crossed Evelina's face. Was it surprise at Dom's defiance? A hint of regret buried beneath her cold exterior? Or was she already calculating her next move, anticipating how to bend this situation to her will? For a moment, her eyes lingered on him as if weighing the man he had become against the son she had molded. Then, just as quickly, the mask of indifference returned. But Dom had seen it. The crack in her armor. Dom turned and walked out, leaving her in silence. Sophia's escape. Back at the villa, the chaos reached its peak. The last of Dom's guards had been shot down, their bodies littering the hallways. Sophia knew she had no time. No backup was coming. The house was compromised, and she was on her own. Clutching Luca tightly, she pressed herself against the wall, listening to the distant sounds of footsteps approaching. With a pounding heart, she forced herself to think fast. The villa had an expansive garden that led to the dense forest beyond. If she could make it there before they found her, they had a chance. With one last deep breath, she sprinted through the kitchen's back exit, her arms wrapped protectively around Luca. The night air was cold against her skin as she raced across the open field. The shouts of men echoed behind her, but she didn't stop. Luca whimpered in her arms, but she whispered reassurances, her only focus on the towering trees ahead. Bullets whizzed past, kicking up dirt near her feet, sending sharp pangs of fear racing through her veins. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her muscles burning as she pushed herself forward. A shot came so close that she felt the heat graze her arm. But she bit back a cry, tightening her grip on Luca. The trees were close, but the footsteps behind her were gaining. Each second felt like an eternity as she sprinted toward the only cover they had left, knowing that if she hesitated for even a moment, it would all be over. With a final desperate push, she dove into the forest, the darkness swallowing them whole. Dom's arrival at the villa. Dom arrived at the villa minutes later, his tires screeching as his car skidded to a halt in the driveway. The sight before him sent an icy dread down his spine. A couple of his men lay motionless near the entrance, blood pooling beneath them. The front door hung open, riddled with bullet holes. Smoke from discharged gunfire lingered in the air. He stepped out, his heart pounding. "Find them!" he barked at his remaining men. "Now!" Marco, limping from a gunshot wound to the arm, staggered toward him, his face etched with both pain and urgency. "Boss." They took down the guards, Sophia and Luca, and they ran into the woods. Dom's eyes darkened as he scanned the wreckage, searching for anything, any sign of where Sophia had gone. Marco coughed, steadying himself. "She left in a hurry, but there's something you need to see." He pulled a small torn piece of fabric from his pocket, Luca's jacket. Dom's stomach twisted at the sight of it, his mind racing with possibilities. The forest was vast, and if they had been running, they could be anywhere by now. He exhaled sharply, shoving down the wave of frustration threatening to consume him. "Then we track them now." "Boss." They took down the guards, Sophia and Luca. They ran into the woods. Dom's fist clenched, his worst fear had come true. "Then we go after them. And whoever did this, they're dead." Sophia's refuge. Sophia ran until her legs burned, her breath ragged in the cold night air. The dense forest provided cover, but every rustling branch, every distant sound, sent a fresh wave of terror through her. Clutching Luca tightly, she pressed her back against a thick tree trunk, willing her pounding heart to quiet. "Mama, I'm scared," Luca whispered, his little fingers gripping her sleeve. "I know, sweetheart," she murmured, forcing a reassuring smile. "But we're safe for now. We just have to wait until morning." She held him close, keeping him wrapped in her coat as the night stretched on. Every hour felt like an eternity. But finally, as the first light of dawn broke through the trees, she spotted a small cabin nestled deeper in the woods. With no other options, she carried Luca the rest of the way, pushing open the rickety door and collapsing inside. She hesitated before reaching for her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed the only number she knew by heart. "Dom," she whispered when he answered, her voice hoarse. "Come get us." Dom's relief and rage. Dom had searched the woods all night, his determination giving way to a gnawing fear that he was too late. Every broken branch, every rustling leaf, felt like a cruel reminder of his failure. His mind tormented him with thoughts of what he could have done differently. Had he underestimated the danger? Should he have taken Sophia and Luca away the moment he learned the Romanos knew? He had spent years believing he was untouchable, always one step ahead of his enemies. But now, for the first time, he felt powerless. If anything had happened to them, it would be on him, and he would never forgive himself. His men were exhausted, but he refused to stop. Then his phone rang. "Sophia?" His breath hitched at the sound of her voice. "I found a cabin," she said, her tone laced with exhaustion and frustration. "Luca and I are safe, for now." Dom exhaled sharply, relief hitting him like a freight train. "I'm coming, stay put." As he shoved his phone back into his pocket, he turned to Marco. "Get the car, now." The drive felt like an eternity, and when he arrived at the cabin, he barely waited for the vehicle to stop before stepping out. His eyes landed on Luca first. The boy was huddled next to Sophia on the front steps, clutching the small stuffed bear that looked worn from years of love. Dom's chest tightened. He had spent his entire life surrounded by men who feared him, by enemies waiting for him to make a mistake. But this child, his child, looked up at him, not with fear, but with curiosity. Luca tilted his head, his small brow furrowing. "Are you my dad?" Dom swallowed, feeling uncharacteristically caught off guard. He crouched down to Luca's level, his usual hardened demeanor softening. "Yeah, kid, I am." Luca studied him for a moment, then nodded, as if he had already decided something. "Mama says you're scary." A smirk tugged at Dom's lips, but there was no humor in his voice when he spoke. "I can be, but not to you. Never to you." Luca seemed to accept this, hesitating for only a second before stepping closer. Dom felt something shift inside him, a small flicker of hope threading through the darkness that had consumed him for so long. This was his son, flesh and blood, standing before him with cautious curiosity instead of fear. It was fragile, this moment, like a bridge being built, one uncertain step at a time. He had no idea how to be a father, but for the first time in his life, he wanted to try. More than anything, it was subtle, but it was something. A small step toward the bond Dom knew he had to build. He glanced at Sophia, who had been watching silently, her expression unreadable. "We need to go," Dom said, his voice quieter than before, his gaze lingering on Luca. Sophia exhaled and nodded, but he could see it in her eyes. She was still unsure if she could trust him. She hesitated for just a second, her gaze lingering on him longer than she intended. In the past, she had been able to read him, to see through the hardened exterior, but now there was something different. A flicker of vulnerability, regret. She hated that a part of her still wanted to believe in him, that the years apart hadn't completely erased what they once had. But trust wasn't something she could give so easily, not when the weight of their past still loomed between them. And for the first time, Dom realized how much he wanted to change that. For Luca, for her, and maybe even for himself. He could do nothing but stare. The sight of her, alive, safe, sent a sharp pang through his chest. He had searched for hours, nearly losing hope, imagining the worst. And now, seeing her in front of him, her defiant stance challenging him as much as it reassured him, he felt something shift inside him. It wasn't just relief. It was something deeper, something he had tried to bury long ago. But he had missed her. Not just Luca, but her. The moment he stepped closer, she shoved him hard against the chest. "Do you have any idea what we just went through?" She hissed, her emotions unraveling between anger and relief. "I had to keep Luca safe alone, while your men were being slaughtered." Her voice cracked. "You promised us safety, Dom. And look where we are." Dom caught her wrists gently, his gaze dark with guilt and frustration. "I know, and I will fix this. No one will ever get that close to you again." Her eyes locked onto his, a mix of fury and something dangerously close to trust flickering in their depths. "You better, Dom, because if you can't, I will disappear. For good this time."